Ove had never been asked how he lived before he met her, but if anyone had asked him, he would have answered that he didn't. On the Saturday evening, he put on his father's old brown suit. It was tight round his shoulders. Then he ate 2 sausages and 7 potatoes, which he prepared in the little kitchenette in his room, before doing his rounds of the house to put in a couple of screws, which the old lady had asked him to do. "Are you meeting someone?" she asked, pleased to see him coming down the stairs. She had never seen him wearing a suit. Ove nodded gruffly. "Yeah," he said in a way that could either be described as a word or an inhalation. The old woman nodded and probably tried to hide a little smile. "It must be someone very special if you've dressed yourself up like that," she said. Ove inhaled again and nodded curtly. When he was at the door, she called out from the kitchen, "Flowers, Ove?" Perplexed, Ove stuck his head round the partition wall and stared at her. "She'd probably like some flowers," the old woman declared with some emphasis. Ove cleared his throat and closed the front door. For more than 15 minutes, he stood waiting for her at the station in his tight-fitting suit and his new polished shoes. He was skeptical about people who came late. If you can't depend on someone being on time, you shouldn't trust them with anything more important either. He used to mutter when people came dribbling along with their clocking in cars 3 or 4 minutes late, as if this didn't matter, as if the railway line would just lie there waiting for them in the morning and not have something better to do. So for each of those 15 minutes that Ove stood waiting at the station, he was slightly irritated. And then the irritation turned into a certain anxiety. And after that, he decided that Sonia had only been ribbing him when she suggested they should meet. He had never felt so silly in his entire life. Of course, she didn't want to go out with him. How could he have got that into his head? His humiliation, when the insight dawned on him, welled up like a stream of lava, and he was tempted to toss the flowers in the nearest bin and march off without turning round. Looking back, he couldn't quite explain why he stayed. Maybe because he felt, in spite of it all, that an agreement to meet was an agreement. And maybe there was some other reason, something a little harder to put your finger on. He didn't know it at that moment, of course, that he was destined to spend so many quarter hours of his life waiting for her, that his old father would have gone cross-eyed if he'd found out. And when she did finally turn up, in a long floral print skirt and a cardigan so red that it made Ove shift his body weight from his right foot to his left, he decided that maybe her inability to be on time was not the most important thing. The woman at the florist had asked him what he wanted. He informed her gruffly that this was a bit of a bloody question to ask. After all, she was the one who sold the greens and he the one who bought them, not the other way round. The woman had looked a bit bothered about that, but then she asked if the recipient of the flowers had some favorite color, perhaps. pink, Ove had said with great certainty, although he did not know. And now she stood outside the station with his flowers pressed happily to her breast, in all the red cardigan of hers, making the rest of the world look as if it was made in great scale. "They're absolutely beautiful," she smiled, in that candid way that made Ove stare down at the ground and kick at the gravel. Ove wasn't much for restaurants. He had never understood why one would ever eat out for a lot of money when one could eat at home. He wasn't so taken with show of furniture and elaborate cooking, and he was very much aware of his conversational shortcomings as well. Whatever the case, he had at least eaten in advance, so he could afford to let her order whatever she wanted from the menu, while opting for the cheapest dish for himself. And at least, if she asked him something, he wouldn't have his mouth full of food. To him, it seemed like a good plan. While she was ordering, the waiter smiled ingratiatingly. Ove knew all too well what both he and the other diners in the restaurant had thought when they came in. She was too good for Ove. That's what they'd thought. And Ove felt very silly about that, mostly because he entirely agreed with their opinion. She told him with great animation about her studies, about books she'd read or films she'd seen. And when she looked at Ove, she made him feel, for the first time, that he was the only man in the world. And Ove had enough integrity to realize that this wasn't right. He couldn't sit there lying any longer. So he cleared his throat, collected his faculties, and told her the whole truth. That he wasn't doing his military service at all. That in fact he was just a simple cleaner on the trains who had a defective heart and who had lied for no other reason than that he enjoyed riding with her on the train so very much. He assumed this would be the only dinner he ever had with her, and he did not think she deserved having it with a froster. When he had finished his story, he put his napkin on the table and got out his wallet to pay. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, shamefaced, and kicked his chair leg a little before adding in such a low voice that it could hardly even be heard, "I just wanted to know what it felt like to be someone you look at." As he was getting up, she reached across the table and put her hand on his. "I've never heard you say so many words before," she smiled. He mumbled something about how this didn't change the facts. He was a liar. When she asked him to sit down again, he obliged her and sank back into the chair. She wasn't angry, the way he thought she'd be. She started laughing. In the end, she said it hadn't actually been so difficult working out that he wasn't doing his military service, because he never wore a uniform. Anyway, everyone knows soldiers don't go home at 5 o'clock on weekdays. Ove had hardly been as discreet as a Russian spy, she added. She'd come to the conclusion that he had his reasons for it, and she liked the way he listened to her and made her laugh, and that, she said, had been more than enough for her. And then she asked him what he really wanted to do with his life if he could choose anything he wanted. And then he answered, without even thinking about it, that he wanted to build houses, construct them, draw the plans, calculate the best way to make them stand where they stood. And then she didn't start laughing as he thought she would. She got angry. "But why don't you do it then?" she demanded to know. Ove did not have a particularly good answer to that one. On the Monday, she came to his house with a brochure for a correspondence course leading to an engineering qualification. The old landlady was quite overwhelmed when she looked at the beautiful young woman walking up the stairs with self-confident steps. Later, she tapped Ove's back and whispered that those flowers were probably a very good investment. Ove couldn't help but agree.